I see Ailey has started recording. Thank you, Ailey. I was just about to remind myself to remind you to do that.
Shall we get going?
Yeah, are we declaring that a quorum?
Yeah, so.
Splendid. Okie dokie. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Yanto Guy. I am a vehicle safety and technology consultant with TRL. My purpose here today, I am acting as MC and filling in for Camilla Fowler, who unfortunately is unwell at the moment. And what I'm going to do is introduce who TRL are, and I imagine many of you already know who TRL are. And also explain a bit about the project that led up to the development of the Camsat tool and where we're going next with it. So, first of all, let's just check that everybody can see the appropriate shared screen. And Ros, scream if you can't.
I can see it.
Excellent. So, some housekeeping. Please ensure that you're muted and your cameras are off throughout the presentation. If you've got any questions, then please add them to the chat area. We will have a Q&A session right at the end of the presentation, so I think we'll probably accumulate questions as we go along and then deal with them all at the end. This session is being recorded, and that recording will be made available in the next few days. We'll post it up onto the TRL website. So introductions, as I said, I'm Dr. Yanto Guy. I'm vehicle safety and technology consultant. I'm joined today by Ailey McGregor, who is one of our graduate researchers, by Ros Walker, who is a senior risk consultant, and by Will Perrin, who is also a risk consultant. So, who are TRL and what do we do? The history of TRL goes back to 1933. We were formerly a government department. We were part of the Department for Transport, and we were effectively the research and development wing of the Department for Transport, or whatever those various ministries were called throughout our history, up until 1996 when we were privatised. We now act as a non-profit distributing research organisation working in the transport sector. So we're entirely independent. We are wholly owned by a non-profit distributing trust. TRL's vision is clean, efficient transport that is safe, reliable and accessible for everyone. And our mission is creating the future of transport using independent research and innovative thinking to develop sustainable solutions. We have fairly recently reviewed our strategic aims and the way we organise ourselves strategically. And we have come up with what are in effect 6 key themes for the organisation. So over on the left-hand side, we have 3 themes which are societal and economic drivers for change within the transport sector. So perhaps the first and most obvious is environmental considerations and decarbonisation, reducing the impact of transport on the environment and improving the sustainability of transport. The next one down is transport safety, and transport safety is one of the big themes for TRL and always has been historically. We have been extremely active throughout our history in the development of safety technologies, safety testing and so on. And of course, the work that we're talking about today feeds into that transport safety work. And finally, transport for sustainable development. So this is working with low and middle income countries to improve their access to sustainable transport and to ensure that as access to transport improves, we don't have a commensurate environmental effect. So improving the lot of people in low and middle income countries and also improving the sustainability of their transport systems. So over on the right-hand side, we have opportunities to enable better outcomes. So the first one of those is digitization in transport. So this is using information technology, the information that it's possible to gather from vehicles, to gather from infrastructure, to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of transport systems. The next one down is automation in transport, which obviously is key to our theme today. So I guess everybody on this call kind of understands that automation is a growing theme across the whole transport sector. So road transport, but also in all of the off-highway areas, in construction and mining and things like that. And finally, new mobility. So new mobility is all of those new forms of transport that have developed in the last few years. So we're thinking about things like e-scooters and hoverboards, but also bigger things like Hyperloop. So all of those new forms of transport, the new mobility forms that are feeding into the existing transport sector. So these are our 6 key themes as a company. Each of these key themes has a leader. We have a head of for each of these who is responsible for the furtherance and the development of these themes within the company. TRL's history in the automated vehicle world goes all the way back to the 1960s. So for any of you who remember the Citroën DS, that had a great big computer in the back of it that was may still be actually exhibited at the Science Museum. TRL was very much active in the development of that vehicle almost 50 years ago. 60 years ago even. Since then, our more recent history, back in 2015, we were involved with the Gateway project. So this involved running automated passenger pods around the Greenwich Peninsula, working collaboratively with a number of other companies, including Fusion Processing and Westfield, who actually built the pods themselves. One of our roles in that project was the development of the safety assurance and the safety case framework for the project. Since then, we've been involved with projects like Driven and Streetwise, where again we took a lead role in the development of the safety framework for those trials. Helm UK is an ongoing project which TRL are leading at the moment. So this is on-road platooning using heavy goods vehicles, working with DAF trucks. We're running a platoon of 3 trucks where the lead truck is driven by a human driver, and then the 2 following trucks still have drivers in the cab. But the headway, the separation to the lead truck is dealt with by an automated system. And this is a trial to demonstrate the effectiveness and the effect of platooning on the UK road network. Finally, and probably a good, very much linked to today's theme, Testbeds. We set up the Smart Mobility Living Lab London, which is a London-based on-road test bed for the testing of new mobility, particularly automated vehicles. We operate the SMLL as effectively a department of TRL, although it is separate from our company. So to come to this project, Project Endeavour. Project Endeavour is another collaborative project working with a range of partners. The purpose of Project Endeavour is to develop multi-location road trials, road pilots. There have obviously been a number of single location trials that have taken place over the last few years. One of the key themes for Endeavour is that we're trying to go to different places. We're going to different towns and cities operating in different areas. Now, that brings with it a level of complexity, and part of our theme today, or our big theme today, is working out how we can reduce the complexity when we move from one area to another. There tends to be a difference in approach taken by different local authorities, different test beds and so on. So we're trying to come up with some cohesive system in which it's possible for a trialling organisation to be able to, for example, go and do a trial in London and then move that trial to Oxford and then perhaps move that trial to somewhere else without having to replicate an awful lot of the safety work and the assurance work that they did to get going in the first place. The partners in this project are Oxbotica, who are the lead trialing organisation. They're providing the cars and the automation. DG Cities, who are leading on the service design and are leading the public engagement in the project. Immense, who are a simulation company, who are providing the simulation for the trials. Oxfordshire County Council, who are the lead local authority partner in the project. And of course, Oxbotica are based in Oxford. And then finally, TRL and the British Standards Institution, who are working on the safety assurance of those trials. So we have a number of challenges and we have a number of complexities to deal with. So the objective or the objectives of the Endeavour project, first of all, to ensure safety throughout trials and testing. Clearly, everybody is very concerned about ensuring that any trial of any new or experimental vehicle is going to be done in the safest possible way. The next objective is to enable testing and development. I mentioned that there are problems when you move from one area to another. And of course, as we start to develop more sophisticated and more complex automated transportation systems, we're obviously going to have the need to be able to operate between areas. One of the whole purposes of automated transport is that we can move from one area to another. So coming up with ways that simplify that process of moving from one location to another are kind of key to what we're doing. And the final objective is to enhance public confidence. Clearly, with any new technology, there is always going to be a level of public concern and uncertainty. And we're at a stage in the development of automated vehicles where any incident or accident is likely to have a very high profile and potentially a very significant effect on the future development of any technologies. So we are all aware, of course, of the fatality that happened in America with the Uber crash, and we've all seen how big an impact that had across the industry. So a single fatality, which had it not been an automated vehicle, would almost certainly have seen no press coverage outside of the local area, has seen international coverage and comment. So we, as people working in the trials of automated vehicles, have a very great responsibility to ensure that we do everything to the safest possible standard in order to improve public confidence in automated vehicle technology. And we need to be conscious that anything we do may have a very, very big impact outside of our local domain. The challenges we have then, providing assurance to stakeholders, and that is obviously a broad spectrum of things when we actually come to do it in a practical way. So there is assurance to members of the public who might see an automated vehicle being trialled in their area, which may be actually a fairly simple task about explaining what's happening and what this means for them, right up to approvals organisations, test beds, people like that, who may want to take responsibility for assessing safety cases and things like that. So providing assurance to those stakeholders is an important part of the trials process. We have a big challenge in that the complexity of trials varies a great deal from one trial to another. So we may see very simple trials in which effectively passenger systems are being carried on an automated or a pseudo-automated vehicle where the human driver has full control of the vehicle, right up to the kind of very sophisticated trials that we see people like Oxbotica are undertaking, where the vehicle is being driven in real traffic conditions in quite complex environments and undertaking quite a complex driving task. There is also, of course, a level of complexity that is introduced by the organisations who are involved in these trials, and we have a great diversity in the range of organisations who are responsible for trials organisations that range from actually some very small startups, some little 5 or 10 people companies who have only been running for a couple of years, right up to the very biggest international automotive OEMs. And there is obviously a diversity of approach that comes from those different types of companies and the experience and the expertise that they have within them. The next challenge is that we want to ensure consistency in the way that safety cases are developed and evaluated. One of the problems comes from that diversity of organisations who are involved, and the fact that standardisation in this area has not yet fully bitten. It hasn't fully taken effect. So the approach that one organisation takes to the development of a safety case and safety assurance may be very different to the way another organisation does it, which isn't to say that either of those approaches might be wrong, but because there is a diversity of approach, it is very difficult for anybody looking at that process from the outside to properly understand which one is right or whether both are right, to interpret the information that they're being given. So the solutions, we want to try and come up with a standardized approach to safety assurance. And part of what we're doing today with the tool that we're talking about has been designed to in part address that issue of standardization. We want to ensure that safety is proportionate. So safety is of paramount importance, but it is also possible that we introduce safety assurance systems that are so complex that they prevent any trial from taking place, which obviously will reduce the possibility for the development in the industry. So we need to strike a balance and ensure that the safety assurance processes that we introduce are proportionate to the level of risk. And finally, we want to provide assurance to stakeholders. We want to make sure that everybody is happy and understands what is happening in their area and in their industry. So there is already a structure, of course, and this structure is developing in the standardization of safety assurance for automated vehicle trials. And this is developed very relatively rapidly over the last few years. So at the very top there, we have the Department of Transport Code of Practice that I'm sure we're all familiar with, which provides a very good top-level guidance on the way that trials organisations ought to be behaving when they're conducting automated vehicle trials on the public road. Below that, we have a series of standards administered by BSI, which cover different elements of the safety assurance process for automated vehicles and the trials that take place of them. So PAS 1880 is for the design of control systems, a technical standard which explains how those control systems ought to operate. 1881 is all about safety assurance and the development of safety cases. 1882 is about data collection and what data ought to be collected. 1883 is about the operational design domain, the way the operational design domain ought to be defined, and it provides a taxonomy for how that should be done. And finally, 1884 is for safety drivers, the training and their responsibilities. Sitting below that, or sitting below 1881, is the Zenzik safety case framework, which is specifically developed for test beds. And Ros will talk a little bit more about the interaction between what we're doing and the guidance that we're providing and the Zenzik safety case framework later on in this presentation. So I mentioned the Department of Transport Code of Practice, which I think we're all familiar with. Within it, it says trialling organisations are expected to develop a detailed safety case before conducting trials, which demonstrates that the trial activity can be conducted safely. And they also say those planning a trial should engage with all relevant organisations with responsibility for the trial areas. And this statement can sometimes lead to some confusion and some misunderstanding about who should be engaged. Clearly, there are a great many organisations who may feel that they have an interest, so local authorities, the emergency services, and so on. And it's very often not entirely clear who a trials organisation ought to be going directly to. And there is also a diversity of expectation amongst some of those organisations. So the expectation that you get from one local authority, for example, or one emergency service in one area may not be the same as the expectation of a different local authority or an emergency service in a different area. So Today, we are talking about the Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance tool. So this is a tool for communicating the way in which safety assurance is being done in a trial. It is a software tool for standardizing that process. So the first question is, what is a safety case? A safety case is not just a risk assessment, and often there is some confusion about what's the difference between safety case and risk assessment. Risk assessment may sit within a safety case, but it isn't itself a safety case. So a safety case is a structured argument supported by evidence to demonstrate that a trial or a testing activity is safe, and it's developed by the trialing organisation. So the people who are coming along to do the test, they develop a safety case to demonstrate that what they are proposing will be done in a safe way. Why is it needed? It's needed because it promotes safety during the technology development process and during the trials process. It minimizes the risks of incidents. Hopefully, by going through that process of developing a safety case, you are looking at all of the possible failure modes that could occur, all of the possible incidents that could occur, and coming up with ways to mitigate what all of those are, to minimize the possibility of any incident happening on the road. And finally, the safety case provides assurance to stakeholders through their review and through their acceptance. So by sharing the safety case, either in full or in an abridged form, allows you to provide some assurance to stakeholders that what's being done is being done in a safe way. So there are several roles within this process, and there are several interactions and interfaces that go on. So on the left-hand side there, we have the safety case creators. So these are the trialing organizations. These are the people who are preparing that safety case and who have the best insight into the technology and the trial that's being conducted. And on the right-hand side there, we have the stakeholders who we are engaging with. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's perhaps the key players. So the insurers for the trial, the insurers obviously have an interest because ultimately it is them who are financially liable for any incident that might occur, and they need to understand the level of risk that they are accepting. We have the local and the roads authorities. Now, while the local and roads authorities may not necessarily have a legal responsibility here, it is obviously in their interests because they want to understand the level of risk if it is being changed by the activity that's going on in their area or on their road network. So we also include motorways and things like that within this category. So while they don't necessarily have that responsibility to do any assurance, they certainly need to assure themselves that by having a trial take place on infrastructure that they're responsible for, the level of risk is not being unduly affected. And finally, Testbeds and Landowners, which of course is the majority of this group today. So you obviously want to understand the level of risk that you are accepting, because for a variety of reasons. You obviously want to ensure safety and ensure that no incidents occur. You obviously have concerns about your reputational damage that might occur from any incident and things like that, and you want to protect your infrastructure. The circle here indicates that this isn't a one-way process, that there will be some exchange of information between the stakeholders and the trialing organisation and vice versa. So the preparation of the safety case very often needs to be an iterative process in which there is discussion between the trials organisation and the stakeholders with whom they're engaging. So this slide really describes the role that the various stakeholders take on. So first of all, we have the insurers who, as I mentioned, are taking on the ultimate financial responsibility for any incidents that might occur. The insurance industry is obviously very much based on historical precedent. When you go and buy your car insurance, you say to them, well, I've got this type of car and I've been driving for this long and I'm this old and I'm a man or a woman and I live in this area. And based on all of that information, They will work out what your relative level of risk is, and they will charge you a fee accordingly. Now, of course, with automated vehicles, where we don't have that that enormous volume of historical data, because there are so few automated vehicles operating and they have a very short operational history, the insurers are not able to use that historical data to rate the risk of the activity that you're proposing. So by looking at the safety case, they're able to at least give themselves some assurance that things are being done in a safe way. And by examining the safety case, they're able to establish what level of risk they are accepting by ensuring that trial. So the safety case acts as the key body of evidence for them in assessing that the level of risk that they're accepting, and consequently the fee that the trials organisation will have to pay. For the road and local authorities, there is effectively no expectation that they have to review safety cases. Many local authorities have decided they want to, and some local authorities are far more engaged than others in this process. So some local authorities who have no experience whatsoever of automated vehicle trials will make no noise at all and will not be interested, whereas others, for example Oxfordshire, who are obviously very experienced because of the companies who are based within their area, will want a far more in-depth assessment and will become far more involved with the process. And what the local authorities are doing is that they want to understand how safety is being managed and the impact for other road users within the area that they have responsibility for. And then finally, we have the testbeds and the landowners who are seeking safety assurance to ensure that that is proportionate to the level of risk, to ensure that safety has been appropriately considered in the design of a trial, and that appropriate safety assurance measures are in place to ensure that the risk that is being borne by the testbed or by the landowner is minimised. This slide effectively demonstrates the sort of flow and the process of stakeholder engagement and the way in which stakeholders may choose to interact with this process. So here on the left, we have the insurers and the local and roads authorities, the testbeds and the landowners. So the options for them, they might choose, whichever one of these stakeholders may choose to undertake an independent technical review of a safety case. Now, undertaking an independent technical review is not a straightforward process by any means. This is not as simple as half a day of saying, well, have you got a risk assessment and have you got a safety case? One of TRL's big areas of business is that we perform reviews for trials organisations, and this process can take months. It is a very detailed and very in-depth process. You might choose, if you are one of these stakeholders, to take a rather more high-level approach and assure yourself that other people are taking responsibility, but without necessarily wanting to delve too deeply into the technicalities of what is being proposed to you. So some stakeholders may choose to take the view that provided they know that somebody has prepared a safety case, then that will be acceptable for them, and they don't necessarily want to get involved with the process of reviewing that safety case. So the big challenges, reviewing a safety case is a highly technically challenging process and requires a really detailed and in-depth understanding both of the technology involved and also of the trials process itself and the way that those trials are being put together. And many stakeholders will not have the technical knowledge necessary to do a proper review. So their option, if they want to take the first approach where they want a detailed exploration of what's being proposed, is they have to buy that expertise in from a company like TRL. That obviously brings with it a cost. And when we talk about many months of work, then potentially the cost of undertaking that review can be extremely high. Many stakeholders are concerned about the issue of liability. So there is a concern that if you undertake a safety case review, perhaps as a local authority or as a test bed, then at that point you are somehow accepting liability for ensuring that that safety case is appropriate. And if there is an incident, then somehow there is some liability on you. There is the difficulty that there is no standard approval mechanism, no standard method for doing these things. TRL have developed various methods internally for doing safety case assessment, but that isn't to say that the TRL method is necessarily the method. There are a range of other methods that other people may use. It is very difficult to enable transition between different locations and between different local authorities. So the expectations of one local authority or the emergency services in one area may be very different to the expectations in another area. And a trials organisation can find themselves having to redo work that they've already done in one area when they go to a new area because of that change in the level of expectation from the new area that they're moving to. And there is also a difficulty of safety case accessibility. A safety case isn't necessarily a single nicely presented document that you can read through from cover to cover, and that will provide you with all of the information that you need. A safety case is often a broad set of information that lives within different files. And very often it is very difficult for a trials organisation to give access to that data for technical reasons, but also because very often there will be issues of commercial sensitivity. So the safety case will often contain information which is extremely commercially sensitive about the way in which an automated vehicle system is operating. And trials organisations are very reluctant to share that extremely sensitive information, particularly if they have to do it with multiple external organisations. So if they're sharing the same information with multiple local authorities, for example, they might start to worry very much about how that information is being protected and kept secure. So the solution is to develop a cost-effective review process that ensures compliance with the DFT's code of practice, and provides a consistent and simple approach so that as you move from one area to another, you can ensure that you're not being required, or a trials organisation are not being required to redo work that they've already done. So I'm going to hand over to Ros, who is going to explain in a bit more detail about the way the connected and automated mobility safety assurance tool actually works and how it's been developed by TRL. And you're on mute, Ros.
Sorry about that. Can you do the moving of the slides? Thank you. So thanks, Ianto, for your fabulous introduction. I am Ros Walker, and I was technical lead for Project Endeavour's Safety Assurance Workstream. So this slide is really just outlining some further details around the workstream objectives for the safety assurance in Project Endeavour. So firstly, we wanted to look at improving consistency and reducing complexity in the approach to safety assurance. And in order, this would then help drive pop-up autonomy. So this is the ability to be able to move between one trialling location and another with relative ease and not having lots of administrative burdens. The second focus was around improving understanding and capability for those demonstrating or assessing the safety case of trials. So what we've done is developed a couple of key tools to help provide support to stakeholders involved in the safety assurance of CAV trials, and we'll go through those tools in further detail later on. Next slide, please. And so before we kind of engaged on the work package, we decided that we would do some stakeholder engagement. Firstly, to really identify the needs of stakeholders in the safety assurance of CAV trials, and also to develop appropriate solutions to meet those needs. So we engage with a range . Sorry, I don't know if I cut out there.
You froze to me, but you're back again.
Okay, where did I get to?
Good question. We lost the last 10 seconds or so.
All right. Okay, so yeah, there's a range of stakeholder groups that we engage with, including trialling organisations, road and local authorities, testbeds and landowners, and
we've hit the dreaded faulty broadband problem, haven't we? Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
If it carries on, I might take my camera off, so we'll see how it goes. We didn't have any issues yesterday. So next slide, please. So this is a slide detailing the findings from the trialling organisations. So the first bit of feedback was around lack of understanding. So when they were engaging with stakeholders on safety cases and safety assurance, they said that they spent an awful lot of time trying to educate different stakeholders on the requirements around safety assurance and safety cases. So before stakeholders could even review the documentation that they were providing, and then they had to kind of give them this whole education piece, which is obviously fine if you're trialing in the same areas again and again, but if you're trying to achieve a movement between different trialing locations or different local authority areas, then obviously that's quite time consuming and burdensome for the trialing organisations. So that was one challenge that they were expressing. Another challenge was around the fact that the safety assurance requirements between different stakeholders weren't uniform. So they're having to kind of constantly adapt the way they presented information to different stakeholders depending on their requirements. So obviously with test beds, they may have their own kind of risk assessment requirements, etc. And then local authorities may request something different, and insurers might request something different. So they spend an awful lot of time trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of their information to provide whatever was requested from different stakeholders. And one kind of big bit of feedback was that if the safety assurance activities were more extensive in one particular test bed or one particular local authority area to another, then that might encourage them to kind of almost go down the easy route of going to those that aren't necessarily requiring an awful lot of information, which obviously is a key barrier to testing. And if test beds or local authority areas wanted to encourage testing in their particular domain, then obviously just need to be key not to make the process too burdensome for trialling organisations. Next slide, please. So in terms of local authorities, just for kind of wider context, one thing that we found was there's a wide variation in experience of CAV trialling. So some had previously hosted a number of trials, such as Oxfordshire County Council, whereas others either hadn't done any trials at all or certainly had very limited exposure to trialling. So obviously those that are less experienced is the ones that the trialling organisations have to spend a lot more time kind of educating and upskilling on safety assurance. There was also an inconsistency in the approach that local authorities were taking in the safety assurance of trials. So some were doing a full safety case review if they had internal capability. Others were seeking independent reviews from external consultancies, and others had developed some kind of high-level assessment questions to help to kind of just get the high-level kind of assurance around safety. One other thing that came out was around responsibility for safety assurance, which I think Ianto's already alluded to. But obviously local authorities felt that there was they had a role to make sure that safety of trials are maintained within their areas. But at the same time, they didn't want to take on any liability for trials and felt that if they were sent a safety case and they reviewed it and almost said that it was acceptable, that they were potentially taking on that liability. Next slide, please. In terms of insurers and insurance bodies, we had similar kind of patterns. So they also had a variation in experience of CAV trialling. Some of them, weren't interested in CAV trials. Others might have had interest, but hadn't really done an awful lot. And then there were others that had been extensively involved in trials and really getting into the nitty-gritty of safety cases. And it's that latter group that had themselves built up extensive knowledge and expertise within their own teams related to the safety and risk review of trials. There was also inconsistencies in the processes that different insurers were taking to evaluate risk and safety. So whilst there were similarities in approach, there was also some key differences in the way that they were approaching safety cases and safety reviews. Whilst this particular stakeholder is definitely more likely to want to get into the nitty-gritty detail of a safety case, and particularly things like risk assessments, because of course they are ensuring the risk of trials. They also expressed an interest in having some kind of high-level checklist, because obviously there's lots of new standards coming to market all the time, and it's really difficult for them to, you know, be an expert in everything. So they kind of wanted something that would help kind of enable them to understand that the whole safety case was compliant against all different legislations and standards, whilst also getting into the nitty-gritty detail of the kind of risk assessments, etc., within the safety case. Next slide, please. So lastly, we spoke to some of you guys, Testbeds and Landowners, and again, similar patterns occurred. So we found a varied exposure experience to trialling, with most kind of Testbeds and Landowners either working towards accommodating trials or obviously having already had trials within their areas. There was no kind of consistent approach to safety assurance. So some of the newer Testbeds kind of in this area were developing their own processes around kind of safety assurance. Some of the more mature Testbeds already had their own risk assessment processes in place, but what we found was there's no real standardized approach due to a lack of specific tools. Again, we found an interest in high-level checklists, just again, similar to the fact that the standards and regulations are, you know, kept updated, and, you know, it's just a way of ensuring that you're keeping up to date with the latest information. And similar to local authorities, there was a kind of message that Testbeds and landowners don't want to take on any liability for trials, and that should definitely remain within the trialling organisation's domain. Next slide, please. So some kind of generic feedback across all stakeholder groups, which is kind of worth mentioning because it has helped to inform our thinking around the future of safety assurance, was one around this kind of generic wish to be kept up to date. So stakeholders all seem to suggest that there's a lot of changes in the CAV landscape, and it's really difficult and time consuming to keep up to date with everything that's happening. So they were kind of keen to have some kind of support in keeping up to date. A second thing was around interest in knowledge sharing. So I think a common point that was raised around stakeholders was that there's not enough visibility of events that occur in CAV trials that don't lead to incidents. So obviously incidents are recorded, but anything before that isn't necessarily recorded by the industry. And they were kind of keen on the idea of having some kind of lessons learned knowledge share system to capture those learnings from events, but also to share some best practice as well. We obviously had a good idea about some of the tools we were keen to develop, and we used stakeholder engagement to kind of initially sound out some of those tools and services, and that's obviously formed or helped inform the outputs of the work package. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there's a couple of key outputs that we've done within Project Endeavour. So the first is a suite of stakeholder guidance documents. So these is really kind of around trying to improve the understanding of the requirements for safety assurance. So through the stakeholder engagement, we identified some key gaps in knowledge. So what we've done is created stakeholder specific guidance documents, one for trialling organisations, one for local and road authorities, and one for insurers. We obviously we kind of toyed with the idea of doing one for Testbeds, but because of the Zenzik safety case framework, we felt that there was enough guidance specifically for that stakeholder group, and actually probably would end up being, you know, more trouble in terms of flooding you with too much information than anything else. So we decided just to stick with the other three stakeholders, but these will be publicly accessible, and we'll send links next week so you can have a look at them, because there may be some relevant bits within there for you guys as well. Just as a high level, what do they kind of include is really around what safety assurance is and what are the requirements for those specific stakeholders. It kind of outlines a process that they can follow for safety assurance of trials, and also includes some best practice case studies, some of which are the Endeavour, some examples from the Endeavour Consortium, and also some wider projects that we've been involved in Next slide, please. So in addition to the guidance, we've also kind of created a new online software tool called Camsat, which is Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance Tool. And obviously that's largely the focus of today's session. So the aim of Camsat is to facilitate a fast and efficient trial safety reviews process, which allows safety to be assured whilst addressing the key challenges that we've outlined from the stakeholder engagement. So now I'm going to pass you over to Will, who will provide an overview of the tool and run through a demo.
Thanks, Ros. That's great. So just as a brief introduction, I'm Will Perrin and I'm a safety and risk consultant at TRL. And I've been developing and working on Camsat for quite some time now. So we're now at a point where we can start to demo it. And I'm really excited to sort of show you guys how it all works. So could you go to the next slide, please, Yanto? So just want to run through quickly before doing the demo how the tool works and how it should help alleviate some of the issues that we've noted from the stakeholder engagement. So firstly, how it works. So Camsat has really been developed to support the exchange of safety assurance information between a trialling organisation and any of the stakeholders that are involved in CAM trials. So the tool works by having two types of users primarily. So that'll be the reviewer and the trialling organisation. And the tool is focused around asking the trialling organisation to complete a questionnaire that contains high-level questions on safety. And those questions are really designed to ensure compliance with relevant regulations, standards, and good practice. So once that questionnaire is essentially filled out, Camsat then automatically feeds those answers back to the reviewer for comment, and that really allows that sort of two-way exchange of information, all kept in one easily accessible case file. So the intent with this is to present a really simple approach to streamline safety assurance for CAV trials and hopefully address those key challenges. Really, we're aiming for the tool to be usable by all types of reviewing stakeholders, so that includes testbeds and landowners such as yourselves, as well as local authorities, road authorities, and of course trialling organisations as well. So next slide, please, Yanto. So I'm just going to take you through in the next few slides how we've approached some of the key challenges raised with stakeholder engagement and how the tool is developed to address those challenges. So in terms of the first challenges, reviewers often need to be assured that a trial is being conducted safely for their own sort of responsibilities in terms of ensuring safety and the due diligence that they need to apply. But of course, it's important that the reviewers aren't accepting responsibility for safety more so than they would be by doing sort of detailed technical reviews or undergoing an approval or sign-off process. So if that were to occur, then there's obviously issues of liability in the event that something goes wrong. So obviously there needs to be a balance between gaining adequate safety assurance and liability, and we're hoping to reach that sort of perfect balance with Camsat using this self-declaration approach, so using that high-level questionnaire. So this means that stakeholders won't have to undertake a detailed technical review of safety cases, and so they won't be signing off any technical documentation, and so liabilities rest solely with the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. So aside from the liability issues, obviously doing detailed reviews can be significantly time and resource intensive. So the Camsat tool really simplifies this to simply just a review of the trialling organisation's answers to that questionnaire. So essentially it's a review of yes/no information that is already established requirements through standards and best practice. So that should really sort of streamline things in terms of the review. Obviously the tool allows all parties to track the exchange of information automatically because it's all an online tool. So this guides both parties through the workflow and should hopefully streamline that review of safety information, which should ultimately help to prevent, the sort of safety assurance activity from delaying trials. Next slide, please. So obviously a key benefit of the tool is that self-declaration questionnaire, and the benefit of that is it can be really easily configured and updated and distributed at any time. Pardon me, at any time because it's in an online format. So this means that specific bespoke questions can be developed to address specific stakeholder requirements. For example, if you're testing in London, then the questionnaire can be configured to incorporate TFLs, licensing requirements for sort of passenger services, or any other individual requirements that a specific area might have. Another benefit with that is that this sort of flexibility means that if new standards or regulations do come out, then, or even if old ones are outdated, then the questionnaire can be immediately updated to reflect those new requirements. Next slide, please. So as Janto and Ros have mentioned, the protecting of commercially sensitive material is often a barrier to safety assurance for trialling organisations. The difficulty with having detailed safety cases and safety assessments is that they often contain that sort of commercially sensitive material. And we're hoping to sort of remove that barrier with Camsat by focusing only on those high-level questions that provide safety assurance and compliance with standards and best practice. So it's requirements that are well known within the industry and that are already out there. So a self-declaration process based on those requirements wouldn't require commercially sensitive information to be provided. Another sort of key benefit of Camsat is that it's actually part of the IMAP software family, which is developed by TRL software. And that's a really established piece of software that regularly handles sensitive collision data and other sensitive data. So you can be sort of assured that if any information is provided in that in Camsat, it's stored securely within the IMAP module and only accessible between the reviewer and the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. So finally, one of the key issues we've identified was maintaining an audit trail. So an audit trail of all the safety assurance and engagement activities. And obviously that's been found to be quite difficult previously because that's often been done via email. The benefit of the Camsat tool being entirely automated in its workflow means that the records of the information exchange are all kept securely and kept in one singular case file where it's most relevant. So we hope that can really support decision makers to collate the evidence for that sort of evidence base for their decision making, and can also be used to recall safety assurance information and the exchange of information when needed in the event of an incident or something else. So next slide, please, Janto. So that's a sort of brief overview of our approach to the tool and how we're hoping it will address the key challenges. So just to summarize how that development came about. Obviously, you've heard about all the stakeholder engagement we've done. The tool was really based on addressing those challenges and focusing on what the stakeholders really were looking for and developing a tool to suit that. The approach and the format and the process sort of behind the self-declaration process, and that's based on what Testbeds already do. So it's something that TRL do at SMLL, and it's something that we've engaged with other Testbeds. So it's already part of that sort of approach to safety assurance. So hopefully then that means that it should be very well understood and already proven in practice. So the aim of the tool overall is to really reduce the burden on trialling organisations and reviewers to actually undertake safety assurance. So in the event of essentially encouraging better safety communication overall. And that should really enable interoperability as well between all areas of the UK, so ensuring a consistent approach to safety is being adopted. And that should essentially reduce barriers to testing and encourage testing in all parts of the UK. So that's essentially the summary of the Camsat tool and how it works. Sort of looking forward, at the moment we don't have an approval scheme in place, and there's no sort of simple way of confirming the safety of a vehicle without that. And what we're really trying to do with the Camsat tool is not to overrule safety approval schemes coming in. We really want to just bridge that gap in the sort of interim phase where there's no approval scheme yet, but we want to make sure that safety is being maintained for trials and deployments that are happening in the interim. So next slide, please, Janto. So just a couple of views on sort of the next steps. Currently, the tool has been developed as a concept. So we're working to pilot that tool over the summer. So we're working to identify some pilot trials to test out the tool over the summer before the end of the Endeavour project. So we're looking both in the project, so potential of using the tool for the Greenwich trials that are planned in August, but we're also looking at CAV trials outside of Project Endeavour in various types of environments. So we really want those pilots to take place so that we can get some really rich feedback on the usability of the tool. So if you are interested in piloting the tool and you do have relevant CAV trials that are taking place, then do please let us know at the end of the webinar or later. We're also looking to further define how we can best implement the tool. So really our focus is on how that would be hosted, what are the roles and responsibilities, and who would fund that ultimately. So we've got a couple of polls at the end of the session to get some sort of high-level feedback on this, and we'll also be sending out some questionnaires after the session to get some more detailed feedback. So if you do have an interest and you have some viewpoints that you want to get heard, then please do fill out that feedback. So there are also some potential future enhancements of the tool. So these are based on other issues that stakeholders have noted, but we obviously didn't have the capability to develop that yet as part of the pilot. So we'll be looking to enhance the tool with those should we have funding to develop that. So those potential enhancements could include a centralized database for recording incidents and near misses. So really hoping to share those lessons learned across industry to make sure that safety assurance is really improved in the UK more widely. And another enhancement could be in the areas of keeping stakeholders up to date would be through a news feed to provide relevant updates to the CAM industry, changes to the landscape, updates to funding programs, etc. And also a database containing all the a list of all the regulation standards and guidelines that are relevant to CAM trialing, which would include a hierarchy and some guidance on how that all works and how the relevant requirements are applied across those different documents. So next slide, please, Yanto. So so that's the summary of the Camsat tool and where we're at the moment. We really welcome any feedback that you've got. I'm just going to quickly run you through a quick demo of the tool and how it works. So Yanto, do you mind dropping your screen? And then I'll mess around with Teams to try and get it working. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Shout if not.
Yeah, that's good, Will.
Brilliant, thanks, Yanto. So you can see now that I'm logged into the IMAP Camsat tool. And as I mentioned, there are two main roles within the tool with different levels of access, so the reviewer and the trialing organisation. But there is actually a third role, which we've termed the product owner. So you can see at the moment I'm now signed in as a product owner, and these are the sort of options that I can do as a product owner. So the first one is to allow reviewing organisations to have access to the tool. So that's simply just adding organisations to give them access. I'm not going to dwell into that too much. The main sort of element of the product owner login is to generate the questionnaires. So currently only the product owner will have the ability to create and edit questionnaires. And the aim for that is to really create a standard questionnaire or standard questionnaires for different types of user groups. So the aim there is to maintain consistency of questions and the level of detail asked across the different reviewers. However, if there are individual requirements, as I said, we can easily configure those and adapt that to create sort of bespoke questions if needed. And really the benefit for reviewers in this way is that they won't have to update their questionnaires in line with best practice. The product owner will do that automatically and then update it and redistribute it. So once a questionnaire is created, I can then start to assign that to a reviewing stakeholder. So I can go to organisation management, and you can see there's a list of all the different reviewing organisations that have access. So for example, if I wanted to assign a questionnaire, all I'd have to do is hit this button and there would be a list of all the available questionnaires and I could assign them to that reviewer. So the reviewers might want, you can see here there's different types of questionnaires. So the reviewers might want to have multiple versions of questionnaires to cover different types of trial. An example of that could be one dedicated solely for automated driving, one that has a focus on remote operation, or even ones for other CAM and mobility technology trials, such as e-scooters or automated delivery pods, or etc. So that should enable some sort of flexibility in the amount of questions being asked. So we can, once they've decided which questionnaires that can be applied to that reviewer, I can then hit save, and then that reviewer will have access to those questionnaires and can start sending them out to different trialing organizations to fill out. So I've now just moved over here to a trial reviewer login. So this is what reviewers will have access to, and they have 3 responsibilities. One is to manage their own organization, so that's just reloading in there. So one is to manage their own organization, so that's just essentially having the admin add multiple users so they can use the tool for reviews, and you can have practically an unlimited number of users per organization. And when my internet loads, then I'll take you through the rest. So obviously that's one thing they can do, but the main thing is to essentially invite trialing organizations to fill out a questionnaire and then review those responses. So I can do that by going to trialing organization management as the first port of call, and this will provide a list of all the trial designers that I've engaged with. So for example, if a trialing organization comes to your area or your test bed, for example, looking to test, you can add them as a contact by hitting add trial designer, entering in the basic information and saving them. And then once that's done, you can start to invite them to take a questionnaire. So you can click that box, invite the trial designer, select the most relevant questionnaire, and then hit send invite. So what that will do is then send an email to the trialing organization, and that will invite them to take a questionnaire. So the trialing organization won't need to set up their own account. The questionnaire can be accessible via a web page, so they can access that web page, enter all of their information, and then save that. And they will receive an email confirming that they've completed that. So that's essentially what the reviewers will start to do, and I can move over now to what the questionnaire will look like. So this is what the questionnaire will look like for the reviewer's perspective, but the trialing organisation will essentially see something very similar. I've put some example questions in here to give you a flavour of what might be asked, but they can all be completely configurable. And you can see the questions are essentially yes or no questions aimed at declaring compliance with relevant standards and regulations, so including the Code of Practice, Construction and Use Regulations, PAS 1881, etc. So it's primarily, as I said, it's primarily yes or no questions, so sort of that self-declaration approach, but we can add text, files, or other types of questions. So, attachments and files and images can be supplied if needed as well. The key feature for reviewers is that the questionnaire highlights to the reviewer whether the preferred answer is given or not. So you can see here that will the safety driver be sat in the vehicle? The preferred answer would be yes, ideally, because that just simplifies the safety assurance, and you can understand that that's in compliance with relevant standards and guidance. However, if they say no, that is still compliant with the Code of Practice, but there are obviously additional safety concerns with not having a driver in the vehicle. So that just really highlights when the reviewer might want to wish to ask further detail about the specific question to be better assured of safety. And so if they do want to ask for further detail, they can simply provide a comment. You can see I've put an example comment in there. And then once that comment is provided, that will essentially be sent back to the trialing organisation. So once you've gone through all of the questions, reviewed the answers, and provided any comments, you can simply hit submit comments. The trialing organisation will receive another email and ask them to address any comments. And that's sort of the really key function here, is that it allows both parties to communicate in that exchange of information, and it keeps that evidence and information kept in a thread next to each question, so where it's most relevant and easily understood. So if there are any additional comments that the trialling organisation might need to address, the trialling organisation can complete that via the web page again, finish that and resubmit the questionnaire. And then if there are no additional concerns or anything that needs to be changed, then the review can be completed and simply hit complete review, enter any comments as necessary, and then finalise. Then once that's done, the trialling organisation will be notified that the review is complete and the file is closed. And then the aim is then that should conclude all sort of safety assurance activity. And the whole process should essentially be boiled down to that. It should be very simple and hopefully efficient for all parties. So that was a really quick demo on how the tool works. Hopefully you can see the sort of benefits and the addressing of the challenges that we've mentioned. So we should really hope that streamlines the safety assurance process. So I'm now going to hand back over to Ros, who's got some further discussion and wants to get some feedback from you about what you've seen today. So I'll just pass back. You're on mute, Ros.
Yeah, could you put the presentation back on, Anto? Perfect. So obviously, hopefully you've got a good understanding now of the tool and the challenges that we're trying to address. So we've got a couple of sound bites for you from industry to hear their perspectives. We've started to engage with them on the tool. So the first of these is Graham Taylor, who is Head of Deployment at Oxbotica. And as outlined earlier, Oxbotica is part of the Endeavour Consortium. Next slide, please, Anto.
Hello, my name is Graham Smith, and I'm the Programme Director of Project Endeavour. Today I wanted to talk about the importance of safety assurance. So as part of Project Endeavour, Oxbotica has added our software to a small fleet of 6 vehicles, which we're using to demonstrate autonomy in places like Oxford, Birmingham and London. One of the key imperatives for us as we start to deploy autonomous vehicles into public environments is to be able to ensure the safety of pedestrians, other drivers, and our staff. Safety is ultra important to us and is an integral part of the culture here at Oxbotica. Being able to provide assurances on safety is also really important to the various other organisations we work with, both inside our consortium and outside. However, the safety story is very detailed and it can get confusing. The story starts in very early stages in the design of our software, the implementation of that software into vehicles, the training of our staff that supervise the autonomous vehicles. The safety case also covers things like risk assessment of the routes that we run on, the weather conditions we experience, and also consideration of exactly where and when we'll be operating, both in private and in public environments. Now, whenever we visit a new city to prepare for an autonomous trial or a demonstration, we always find a lot of interest from local authorities and emergency services, but often there's a lot of confusion about what levels of approval are required. And some stakeholders, quite understandably, find it very difficult to stay up to date with the most relevant standards and guidance. So we recognise that stakeholders need to receive adequate assurance that any trial taking place in their area is being conducted safely. And additionally, we find out that local authorities want to avoid taking on liability for those trials, and what they really need is clarity and confirmation that the responsibility for ensuring safety during those field trials remains with trialling organisations like Oxbotica. Now, in Project Endeavour, TRL has engaged with a wide range of our stakeholders, both again inside the consortium and outside, and that's included local authorities, road authorities, emergency services and insurers. And the aim of TRL's engagement has been to explore what sort of tool, what sort of information stakeholders would need in order to support a more consistent approach to safety assurance, wherever we go. So I'm really pleased now to see that TRL are able to demonstrate the software tool they've been developing for trial safety assurance. And as a leader of the Endeavour Consortium, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it works in real life and getting your feedback.
Next slide, please. So we're also going to hear from Oliver Howes, who is the Senior Technical Consultant from the S1L Testbed in Greenwich, and obviously they host a number of cab trials. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm Oliver Howes, and I'm a Senior Technical Consultant for the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is a TRL company. The Smart Mobility Living Lab, or SMLL for short, is an urban test facility created to accelerate the creation and development of new mobility technology and solutions. Much of our work involves supporting customers run many different types of trials on public roads at our 2 instrumented sites in East London, one in Stratford and one in Woolwich in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Testing and validation of technology in a public environment is going to play a key role in the success of new mobility technologies. However, to ensure progressive development of such technologies, safety must be carefully considered. SMLL have a responsibility for the safety of trials taking place in the London CAM testbed, and therefore, as part of our trial deployment process, we conduct a review of all trial safety cases. These reviews must be appropriate for the trial being conducted. For example, if a manually driven trial is planned, SMLL acknowledges that the amount of information required within a safety case is far reduced when compared to an automated vehicle trial involving members of the public. Defining a suitable level of information and detail can sometimes be difficult. The creation and review of a trial safety case needs to be a smooth process, one which is not just a box-ticking exercise, and also one which doesn't create barriers to testing. Using an online collaborative platform to facilitate this safety case review would really help with this. When conducting public trials, the information required by local stakeholders can sometimes be a little unclear. At SMLL, we aim to make this process better understood by our customers, the testing organisations, and a collaborative tool to assist with this would be of great benefit. SMLL also acknowledges that there's potentially a lot of commercially sensitive information in and around a trial safety case. Therefore, sharing the correct and relevant information to satisfy local stakeholders is key. The tool that TRL have been developing in consultation with stakeholders, including test facilities such as SMLL, local authorities, and testing organisations, sounds an interesting and important tool in overcoming these barriers, and I look forward to seeing the initial demonstration.
Thanks. So obviously you've heard from us, you've heard from a couple of industry stakeholders, so we thought we'd do some quick feedback polls. So this is not for TRL colleagues, but just for the testbed community, which there isn't a lot of us because it's a small community, but we'll do them anyway. So one is around how useful you think the Camsat tool will be to help drive consistency and streamline the safety assurance of CAM trials. And second is who you think should fund the tool. So I'll just launch the first of these now. Give me a second. So you should receive an invite. Choose from Testbeds or whoever's on the call that's not TRL, if you could submit your answers. We've got so far 2 votes. I think there's a few more. 3 votes, maybe one other. Okay, I'll leave that for now. We'll come to the second one in case. Oh, we've got it. There we are. So we've got so far we've got 75% saying somewhat useful and 25% saying extremely useful. So that's good to hear. And the second one, I'll just launch that now. Okay, you should see that now. You can submit your answers. One vote so far. 2 votes. 3 votes. There we go, 4 votes. So we've got 75% of you think it should be centrally funded and 25% by the reviewers, so presumably in this case the test beds. So that's really useful information as well. So thank you very much for that. Next slide, please, Ianto. So this leads us to the end of the formal session. So just a reminder again that if you have any trials that are occurring in your areas over the summer, we would really be keen to get in touch. It'd be good to trial the tool. Obviously, it's a demo tool at the moment, so we'd really want to get your feedback on how it could be improved to kind of essentially look at something that could be, useful for everybody. So if you have any demos, CAM trials going on in the next few months, please let us know. It would be free of charge, of course, to use the tool. So what we really just wanted to do for the last 10 minutes or so, or it might take less, is to get any initial feedback from you on what you've heard today, or see if there's any questions. So you can either post your comment or raise your hand. If anyone's got any questions. Okay, Richard and another. So should we go to Richard first?
Yeah, I'm going to ask about
Richard, did you have a question?
I had my microphone up on my head. I've been in listening mode or meeting. Yeah, apologies. Yes, I was going to ask about the sort of adaptability of the tool according to the complexity of the trial, which is something that we discussed obviously between myself and various people at TRL quite extensively within the Zenzik safety case guidance project. So it's a bit of a hot topic generally. So obviously you've got a set of questions that are being asked. I'm guessing perhaps some of the early questions around the sort of test environment and the sort of complexity of the level of control of the environment, the level of immaturity of the ADS, that sort of thing, might then influence the sort of the requirements for what evidence might need to be provided. Yes, so i.e. what boxes you'd have to tick for saying yes, we've done this assurance of the system safety or whatever. Yeah, does that change according to the complexity of the trial?
Will, perhaps you're best to answer that one.
Yeah, thanks, Ros. I mean, I completely understand. I think we've discussed this topic many times actually. So yeah, it's always been in the back of our mind when we've been sort of developing this tool. Essentially, the questionnaires are ultimately sort of completely configurable. So there is essentially the possibility to create sets of questions that are available for various complexities, and we can adapt those to different types of trials and different complexity of trials. One example is sort of remote operation, as often at the moment considered a more advanced trial. So obviously there would be additional questions that might need to be asked there. So that's the benefit of having it sort of completely configurable and online. We can adapt that to create various questions for various sort of scenarios like that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I thought it would be something you would be aware of, because obviously, like I say, that was one of the hot topics within the safety case guidance project. So yeah, okay, yeah, thanks, Will and Ros. Yeah, thanks.
And David, did you have a question?
Yes, hi there. Firstly, thanks for the presentations and the opportunity to comment. It looks a really interesting tool, and certainly the slides around the challenges certainly ring true in terms of what we've experienced and the things that we're trying to mitigate as well. One thing that I was going to comment on, and it's probably sort of half comment, half question, was where you have local authorities or agencies where they have been more engaged and they may have set up their own processes already. Do you see that this tool being something that will be used alongside their existing processes, whereas someone who is perhaps more sort of new into it or less engaged could then adopt this tool straight off the bat? I'm just thinking around the difficulty in sort of changing momentum where you have a company or an authority that has a process already and they're internally are very familiar with that process, and the difficulties with then adopting a new tool or a new process.
Will, perhaps it's worth talking about the Oxfordshire County Council. They are.
Yeah. yeah, I can happily talk about that. So obviously, the aim with doing the stakeholder engagement prior to the development of the tool was to really hope that we could align as much as possible with various local authorities and various people who have different approaches. But ultimately, we found one of the sort of key issues really was, especially in the area of local authorities, was that they often had very different approaches. And that often led to sort of inconsistency between the requirements that were being asked across local authorities. So there's obviously issues there about having the portability of your safety case and your trial to different areas. So one of the main aims was to try and really create a consistent approach that is in line with what's being done currently, or as much in line as possible, to ensure that alignment, but maintain that sort of consistent approach overall. And one of the sort of key benefits of having Oxfordshire County Council as an Endeavour partner is that they are developing that sort of process on in line with ours. So we're really aligned on that sort of process, and Oxfordshire County Council are very experienced in CAV trialling, and they're hoping that they're sort of trying to lead the way in terms of safety assurance for CAV trials. So they've developed a very similar process that we're hoping to adapt into the tool. So they've got a high-level questionnaire focused process. So we're hoping to adapt that into the tool, and then sort of promote that essentially as best practice, so that can be more widely applied across the UK.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks.
I think another one, Highways England obviously have their GG 104 process, and this tool could not replace that process because they have that requirement across the board, so it's not relevant to CAV trials specifically. So I think this tool would essentially, the GG 104 process would still have to happen for those types of trials. This would be kind of an additional process just to make sure you're kind of crossing the I's and dotting the T's. I think, you know, if people have established processes and specific questions that they want to ask in addition to all the questions that are already generic for a particular type of trial, then there's obviously the ability to work with the host of the tool to add questions in, so it's bespoke to you effectively. So yeah, I think it can work as a consistent approach, but then have an element of bespokeness as well.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks. I had a separate question that a couple of what Richard covered well, the other one I was going to ask, but one question was about trial organisations from overseas as well. So say if you have a organisation that has trialled in somewhere else in the EU, for example, does the tool point them towards specifically what the UK standards are to then help them ensure that they are compliant before they then submit?
I can take this one, Ros, as well, if you like. So at the moment, it's currently in the sort of pilot stage where we're developing the questionnaires based on sort of UK best practice. But something that we're very aware of is sort of those international developers, and it's something we've engaged with sort of CCAV on as well. We're hoping that sort of future enhancement of the tool where we can implement a sort of centralized database that signposts all the relevant standards and guidance and what their individual requirements are. We'll hope to address that sort of process, and we can essentially build in other international standards as well into that. So that should hopefully be a future enhancement coming in once we sort of get the tool up and running and off the ground.
Okay, super, thanks.
Gary, I see your hands up.
Firstly, apologies. My system crashed. I've been out the last 5 minutes. Apologies, I've repeated it now. I had a couple of very small, quick questions, both on insurance. First one was, I was surprised and not surprised by the comment you made, Roz, about insurers and their awareness. And it left me reading the question is, who on earth insured these operations before they actually wanted to go do a road trial? So I'm quite surprised that people were approaching, inverted commas, new insurers at a road trial stage in there. So that's just a comment. But then the other one was, there's also the thing like liability, particularly from local authorities in human cases. And I can see where that comes from. But for instance, if as a local authority, I wanted to employ someone to do that review for me, how much liability insurance do you think I ought to ask them to have so that there's no feedback or blowback to me from any future claims?
Quite tough questions. So
Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. So the first one was who was the question that who's insuring trials before?
It's just this idea of people arriving at a road trial without having any track record with an insurer. You know, if people are testing our site, they have to have insurance.
Mhm.
You know, if they're on a closed test track, they have to have a level of insurance. It may be different as it rises up to be on a public road, but I'm surprised that anyone's talking about a scenario where someone arrives, shall we say, cold to do an on-road trial without having an existing relationship with the insurance industry.
So if I can just come in quickly, I think the point that Ros was trying to make is that for a specific road trial, there'll be specific elements that activity will need to be insured specifically. So it's not so much that they have their own, they don't have any contact with the insurance industry. It's more that for that specific trial, the insurer would need to be aware of various elements of the activities that are taking place. And that's what the tool would hopefully address. So I hope that sort of answers that first question. Yeah, so in terms of the second question, in terms of the amount of premiums that you'd ask someone to pay in that event, I can't really comment, but it's a pretty open question, I think, overall, because ultimately it's dependent on an incident actually occurring that might go to the courts, and then liability would be decided there.
Oh, yes and no. If I went back to my previous incarnation as a freelance consultant, and shall we say Oxfordshire employed me to actually review a safety case, how much indemnity insurance do you think Oxfordshire County Council ought to insist I have to make sure that the project has adequate cover? That's the real question. Is how do you actually offset and lay off that risk of liability to an adequate degree? Because if I have, Trump take me of liability insurance as a consultant, it's as good as the road authority taking the liability themselves.
I don't know if we know the answer to that.
No, but I mean, it's probably not an easy answer, but it might be something to think about.
Yeah.
Because typically people like that would try and lay off the risk by appointing a third party. But if that third party carries insufficient cover, they've just failed to offset the risk.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point in terms of third parties. And I mean, hopefully we're looking at the way that this tool works with essentially between the local authority and the trialling organisation, so not necessarily introducing an independent review. But no, that's a very interesting point, and some definite food for thought for TRL, who does that kind of independent review in some cases.
Thank you. Sorry for some questions.
That's all right. Someone's got to do
No.
it. Well, thank you all. I think we've come to the end of the time for the slot, so I hope you found it a really useful session. Please do get in touch if you want to discuss the tool any further. We'll be sending out an email probably early next week with a recording of the webinar, links to the guidance documents. Obviously, they're not specifically for test beds, but might be of interest to you guys anyway. A link to a smart survey, which Will referenced, that's got some further questions, which should hopefully further refine the tool. So if you do have the time, it shouldn't take too long. It's quite short. So yeah, appreciate anybody that can fill that in. But thank you very much for attending today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Nice to see you all.
Thank you all. Thanks. Bye.